good afternoon or good morning or whenever you happen to be watching this. Today we are going to be looking at vegetative structures of angiosperms specifically. Now there are several different important characteristics that we have to consider when we're looking at a plant in order to identify it down to the species. Okay? So first thing you generally want to identify is the leaf type, whether you're looking at a compound leaf or a simple leaf. Alright, and remember we determine this by looking for the axillary buds. All right, which you should remember from the PowerPoint lecture. Okay. In addition to that, we're going to be looking for the leaf arrangement, which is basically how many leaves are attached at a node. All right. And then following that, we are looking for, let's say, those are the big things. We also look at a leaf venation as well. All right, leaf venation, whether it's palmate venation, net venation, and so on. All right. Okay, but before we get to angiosperms, which are the flowering plants, let's first take care of the gymnosperms, because there are 3 species of gymnosperm plant that you should be familiar with. And remember, gymnosperm means naked seed. All right, so these plants, they do produce seeds, but they don't have any kind of a covering or a fruit, and they don't produce flowers. All right, so like I said, there are 3 different species of gymnosperms you should be aware of. Looking up over here to my left, we have what's called a spruce pine, and then behind me we have a loblolly pine. Now, they look pretty similar at a glance, but if you look closely, there are different characteristics that you could use to help distinguish between these 2 fairly similar looking pine tree species. All right? Now, first of all, looking at the needles of a loblolly pine, compared to that of a spruce pine, you should just, kind of right off the bat see that the loblolly pine needles are much longer than that of the spruce pine. Okay? Well, what if you happen to be looking at the terminal end of one of these branches where the needles are smaller? That could obscure the difference based on size alone. Well, there's another trick that you could use to distinguish between these 2 different plants. Okay? And that's by looking at the needle clusters. Now, with a loblolly pine, the needles are going to be clustered in 3s, okay, 3s. Whereas with the spruce pine, they're going to be clustered in 2s, okay. Loblolly pine here on top, and spruce pine down at the bottom. The way I like to remember it is a spruce pine, S, like a snake. It's like the tongue of a snake, okay. You're welcome to use whatever mnemonic you'd like, but again, be sure that you are aware of this distinction because, on the practical exam, as delivered through Moodle, you'll get a picture that's kind of like this, and you should be able to tell the difference between the 2 of them, okay? All right, so, again, these things with leaf arrangement and venation and whether it has a simple leaf or compound leaf, we're not really concerned about that with gymnosperms. So with these guys, these naked seed plants, these basic characteristics that I just described are what you should be aware of in trying to, tell the difference between the 2 species, okay? So, those are 2 of the 3 gymnosperms that we're going to be talking about. And the last one that you should be familiar with, any self-respecting South Louisianian should be able to recognize this tree. This is a bald cypress, okay, bald cypress. Now, these are somewhat unusual as far as these conifers go, these conifer gymnosperms, because of the arrangement of their needles. All right, they almost look like little kind of leaflets like you might see on a fern or something like that. All right, and interestingly, this is one of the few coniferous gymnosperms that actually drops its leaves in the wintertime. And so they are a deciduous gymnosperm, okay, which is unlike, the evergreens that you think of typically, which are pine trees. Again, same related to these plants that keep their leaves over the wintertime. All right, great. So those are the 3 gymnosperms that you should be aware of that you're not really going to identify using those different characteristics that we had just discussed. So to reiterate those characters that we had just discussed, and since we're now going to be getting into the angiosperms, we are looking for leaf type, leaf arrangement, and then the type of venation. All right, again, whether we have a simple or compound leaf, whether we have alternate or opposite, or whorled leaf arrangement, and then finally whether we have palmate, parallel, or net venation. Okay? So, the first of these that we're going to look at is a beautiful example of a blackberry. All right, a blackberry. So blackberries are pretty distinct. They're covered in these thorns, and of course they produce those delicious berries. And they have these somewhat variable leaves that may be in these clumps of either 5 or 3. Now, looking at this leaf, do we think that this is a compound leaf or a simple leaf? Well, it could potentially be simple leaves in a whorled arrangement. But what we would do, the first thing we always do is we look at the base of the leaf and we try to find an axillary bud. Looking at this leaf base here, or these leaf bases, I don't see an axillary bud. So I'm going to go to the next point of attachment and look again. And there I see it. That little green nipple, almost pointed out by this little spider, that is the axillary bud. So we know that everything above it is just one complete leaf, okay? Now, because this leaf is divided into multiple little leaflets, we know that it is a compound leaf, all right? It is a compound leaf. And specifically, this type of compound leaf would be palmately compound, all right? Palmately compound. That's in contrast to the other type of compound leaf, the pinnately compound leaves, which we're going to see on a different plant species, okay? So next, let's try to identify the leaf arrangement. And again, leaf arrangement basically describes how many leaves are attached per node. And again, the node is the point at which the leaf attaches to the stem. So here we have our one compound leaf, palmately compound leaf, and at this point, this node where it is attaching to the stem, there is only one. Moving farther down, I see another one, and then I see another one. So, because it has only one leaf per node, this describes an alternate leaf arrangement. All right, an alternate leaf arrangement on this blackberry here, okay? Next, we can look at leaf venation. Okay, so, and here we have a pinnate leaf venation, okay? So you've got these kinds of, these large kind of central veins branching off of this central rachis, okay? And then you have all these fine little bits of venation like you would see, like, you know, kind of in your own, under your own skin. Okay, so that is a blackberry plant, very important because it is one of the few examples of a palmately compound leaf. And again, palmately compound with an alternate leaf arrangement and this pinnately veined leaves. All right, so let's move on. And here we are. Okay, so this is a swamp red maple. Okay, swamp red maple. This is a very common swamp plant. And it's called swamp red maple because it tends to have these red stems that make it very distinct. Now, in addition to that, another fairly distinctive character that this plant has is it has these really bright green tops with these kinds of silvery undersides. And this is a great way to distinguish it from a sweetgum, which is the next plant that we're going to do. All right? Now, all right, so we have these distinct lobes. All right, another characteristic of this plant. Now, let's determine whether or not it has simple or compound leaves. Okay, here is what I think might be a leaf. Let's follow the rachis down to where it attaches to the stem. Again, what's called the node. And there, if you look very carefully, you could see a little bump. That little bump is the axillary bud. Great, so we know that we have a simple leaf. Now let's determine the leaf arrangement. All right. Looking at a node, again, where the leaf attaches to the stem, we have one and we have two leaves attached to this stem. That means that this has an opposite arrangement. All right, again, we have alternate where one leaf is attached per node, opposite where two leaves are attached per node, and whorled where you have 3 or more leaves per node. This one has 2, therefore it is an opposite arrangement. Okay, now looking at the venation, when you have these lobed leaves like this is typically going to be a palmate venation, all right, where you have multiple of these large central kinds of veins with all these smaller veins branching off of them, just like we saw with the blackberry, all right? Now, a very similar looking plant to the swamp red maple, and also found in similar habitats, is what's called the sweetgum, all right? So again, it has these distinct lobes, but you'll see that it's lacking those pretty red stems. All right, in addition to that, it's kind of this nice sort of lime green on one side and a very similar sort of lime green on the other. It lacks that distinct contrast between the two different surfaces of the leaf. All right. Now, so we have this sweetgum. Sweetgum are kind of weird because the leaves tend to kind of grow very tightly clumped together. But it's important that when you're trying to determine leaf type and leaf arrangement, that you look at a more mature section of the plant because of that clumping. Okay, it can make things seem like they're whorled or opposite when they might not actually be. Okay, so let's try to find a good representative portion on this plant. And I'm just going to break this off right here. Now, so here what I think I have is a leaf. Okay, and I'm going to, here what I think I have is a leaf, and I'm going to look at the base, and there, right in there, we see our little axillary bud. All right, so next up, what kind of leaf arrangement does it have? Well, you know, you might be tempted to think that this is whorled because they all seem to be branching off at one point, but in reality, they're not. Okay, you could see that they are distinctly, layered. Okay, so because we have one attachment here, one leaf, then here we have one leaf, and then here we have one leaf. Okay, it's only one leaf per node, and therefore it is an alternate leaf arrangement. Okay, now again, it's very tight, so it can be difficult to see that. But that's what it is, and that's just something you kind of have to get used to with plants. And again, like the swamp red maple, you know, it has these kind of distinct lobed leaves, all right? And so it's also going to have that fairly characteristic palmate venation associated with that, all right? So far, we have 6 species that we discussed. We have the 3 gymnosperms, okay? We have the loblolly pine, the spruce pine, and the cypress. And then we have the blackberry, which has those distinct palmately compound leaves. And then we have swamp red maple and sweetgum, which both have simple leaves but with different arrangements, okay, opposite and alternate respectively. So let's continue on our leaf adventure. Oh, here's a good one. This is one of my favorites, all right? So the things that we've been looking at so far are really more small trees, okay, small to medium-sized trees. This is the first of the proper vines that we're going to be looking at, and this is what is called a trumpet creeper. All right. Now, trumpet creeper are a really important plant for our purposes because they demonstrate a specific type of leaf type, okay, and the associated arrangement. All right. So here we are looking at our trumpet creeper. And we want to determine, okay, is this a simple or a compound leaf? So I'm going to look at one of my little, you know, presumed leaves here, and I'm going to look at the base. I don't see an axillary bud there. Perhaps if I go down a bit farther. Nope, still no axillary bud. How about here? Still no axillary bud. How about here? Nope, no axillary bud. So what about here? There it is. There's that small green, you know, little nipple there. That is the axillary bud. So we know that everything above it is one compound leaf, okay? Comprised of multiple different leaflets. Where the blackberry was a palmately compound leaf, because all of those leaflets originated from one point, this is a pinnately compound leaf, because the leaflets are arranged in these distinct clusters, okay? So here we have our leaf. Next, we can try to determine the type of leaf arrangement. Well, we have one leaf here. This is the node, and look at that. We have another compound leaf. 2 compound leaves attached at a node. Therefore, this has an opposite leaf arrangement. Pinnately compound leaves with an opposite arrangement. All right, and again, this is called a trumpet creeper. All right, trumpet creepers are these kinds of vines, and they'll grow along trees and all that stuff. They also produce these really beautiful red flowers that are nice and deep, and a lot of primarily butterflies and stuff like that will drink from these deep red flowers. Okay, and as far as the leaf venation goes, this is a pinnately venated leaf. Okay, pinnately, it has pinnate venation. Okay, all right, let's move on. Since we're on the topic of vines, let's discuss another vine. This is another one of my favorite plants. This is what's called a muscadine. So some of you all may have heard of muscadine before. Apparently people make muscadine wine and muscadine jam out of the berries of this plant. But it's got these really kind of happy heart-shaped leaves with this serrate leaf margin. Again, you don't have to, you know, for your exam, you don't have to know the different types of leaf margins. I just want to point it out. It's kind of got this, you know, sort of really jagged sawtooth type thing going on. All right. It's got a palmate venation, okay? Again, all these large kind of central veins are originating at one point and then branching off with their smaller associated veins, okay? And let's determine whether or not it has simple or compound leaves. So here I have what I think might be a leaf. I'm going to look at the base, and bam, look at that. Very, very distinct axillary bud. Okay, so we know it has simple leaves. Let's next try to determine the leaf arrangement. Well, here we have one leaf attached to this node, and then at this node we have one leaf. So we know that it has an alternate leaf arrangement. All right, again, very characteristic of the muscadine. So, muscadine vine, got these big, nice, kind of heart-shaped leaves with these jagged teeth, and it has these simple leaves with an alternate leaf arrangement, meaning one leaf per node. And since we're here, look at what we have. Another one of my favorite plants. Can you imagine that? This is what's called a black cherry. All right, black cherry. Now this one's really important, okay, because black cherry, at least I often, not anymore, but I used to confuse this with American beech. All right, American beech. They have the same leaf arrangement and they have the same type of leaf. All right, and the leaves themselves superficially look quite similar to one another, but there are some important differences. First of all, let's try to identify the leaf type. Okay, so here I think I have a leaf. I'm going to look at the base, and bam, axillary bud, clear as day. All right, so we know that it has a simple leaf. Well, how many leaves are attached per node? One. One leaf per node means that it's an alternate leaf arrangement. Great. Okay, so, and again, fairly typical pinnate leaf venation with all these kinds of more central veins, kind of branching off as pairs along this, the entirety of the leaf blade. All right. So how do we tell this from an American beech? Well, for one, if you touch them, they're waxy. American beech will be fuzzy and smooth, or fuzzy and that's what it'll be. It'll be fuzzy, kind of velvety. All right. Another thing, if you look at the underside of the leaf, it has these kinds of what almost look like scales. Okay, and that scalation for the black cherry is, to my mind, very distinct and a good way of distinguishing between these different plant species. All right, and we're going to get to an American beech here in a little while. Okay? Okay, so this is a black cherry again. So far, just to recap, we have, what do we have? We have a loblolly pine, we have a spruce pine, we have a cypress tree, blackberry, all right, blackberry, not to be confused with black cherry. We have blackberry, we have swamp red maple, sweetgum, muscadine, and the one we just did, black cherry, okay? All right, good. And trumpet creeper, that's a really important one, don't forget that one. Okay, don't forget it, trumpet creeper. So that's 9 so far, all right? Let's continue on. Oh. This is a very important plant species. Not because it's my favorite, but because of the potential harm that it causes to our native ecosystems. All right, this is what's called a Chinese privet. Okay, a Chinese privet. As you may have gathered, Chinese privet are not native to here. They come from East Asia. All right. So, looking at this Chinese privet, let us try to determine the leaf composition. Now, this can be kind of tricky because they're arranged in these very tight little leaf clusters. But if we look carefully, we can go down to the base of what we think might be a leaf. And there, just barely, you could see this tiny little light yellow green blip. That is the axillary bud. All right, so we know it has a simple leaf, and these leaves, again, there's 2 per node. You see that pretty clearly. Okay, 2. We know that it has an opposite leaf arrangement. All right, and again, fairly standard pinnate venation. Okay, so Chinese privet. Now, this is a very important one because not only is it an invasive species that potentially shades out a lot of native species in the understory, it also looks superficially very similar to another plant species called a Yaupon, which we're going to try to find here in a bit. All right, a Yaupon or Yaupon holly. Okay, so anyways, Chinese privet, this is one that you probably definitely want to know. All right, let us continue. here's a good one. So this is what's called an Ash's arrowwood. Okay, Ash's arrowwood. So Ash's arrowwood has what look like to me kind of muscadine looking type leaves. All right, except they don't have that invagination in the top that makes it heart-shaped. So it's more like a spearhead, if you will. Here's a muscadine leaf for comparison. Okay, so whereas the muscadine has this kind of notch in the top, the Ash's arrowwood lacks that. Anyways, so in addition to that, Ash's arrowwood is a shrub, all right, more of a shrub than a vine the way muscadine is, all right? Now, let's try to figure out the leaf type and arrangement, as we always do. So, here we have what we think might be a leaf, and if you peel that back, very carefully looking in there, you can see an axillary bud. So we know that it's, excuse me, we know that it's got a simple leaf, okay? And again, we have 2 leaves per node, so that we know that this arrangement is opposite. All right, it's got an opposite arrangement. So that is the Ash's arrowwood, okay? Let's move on. Okay, here we have what is not one of my favorite plants. This is what's called a water oak, all right, water oak. Now, water oak are a gigantic pain because they have incredibly variable leaf morphology, not only between different individuals, but even on the exact same plant, all right? So your typical water oak leaf will look like this. Some people like to think it looks like a drop of water, hence water oak. They're really called water oak because they're found more primarily in these kinds of bottomland hardwood forests that are prone to periodic flooding. But anyways, they got this, you know, leaf that I guess looks like a drop of water if you wanted to, okay? But, you know, just kind of looking at this plant, you see that there's tremendous variability in the different leaf shapes. I mean, you know, some of the leaves also look like this, and that looks like a regular oak leaf. So these guys can be a bit of a nightmare to identify. Should I give you one of these on your exam, I will give you kind of the standard water oaky looking leaf, which again is kind of more like one of these guys, one of these more teardroppy or water droppy type appearances. So let's determine, you know, those basic things that we need to determine. Okay. Oh, here's a nice twig ant, which just ran away. How unfortunate. All right. So let's try to find an axillary bud. Here we got a leaf. Let's look down there. Oh yeah, it's got at least, you know, for all their faults, water oaks do at least have nice distinct axillary buds. Oh, and look, so you're here on the leaf, you could see a twig ant, which is really nice. Yeah. Anyways, twig ant. Okay, so yeah, so we got this axillary bud. That means we got 1 leaf per node here. Therefore, it is a alternate leaf arrangement. All right, alternate, simple leaves, alternate arrangement. All right, and again, distinct pinnate venation. Okay. For Mr. Ljustina's 154 class, I don't really plan on testing you guys much about leaf venation, but you should still be aware of them. All right, moving on. Oh, here's what we were looking for. This is also one of my favorite plants. Okay, so this is what's called a Yaupon holly. So the scientific name for these guys is Ilex vomitoria. They produce these red berries that look very appetizing, but if you eat them, you know, you throw up, hence vomitoria. Anyways, so these guys superficially look quite similar to Chinese privet. Hold there a moment, I'll get a Chinese privet to show you. So these guys superficially can look something like Chinese privet. Here's a Chinese privet here on the this thin kind of rod that here is the Chinese privet, okay? And here we have the Yaupon, and you can see when you put them together, they look quite similar. But if you look carefully, there are a number of distinctions that can be made. So for one, I find that very often the Yaupon will have these light green younger leaves. So you have this sharp contrast between the older leaves, which are this dark green, and these light green leaves, which are the younger leaves, all right? In addition to that, if you look at the edges of something like a Yaupon, okay, versus a Chinese privet here on the right, a Yaupon here on the left, okay, right? Oh, I'm sorry, that's my right, and my left. Okay, so so the leaf edge, the leaf margin of the Chinese privet is smooth. Okay, whereas on the Yaupon, or the Yaupon holly, it's kind of wavy, almost toothy. All right. Let's also look at the leaf arrangement, okay, and the leaf type. So here, you know, we have what we think might be a leaf. We look in there, we find the axillary bud right there, that little nipple, okay. So we know that it's got one leaf per node, therefore it's an alternate leaf arrangement, okay, and it's got these simple leaves. Another thing that I've noticed about Yaupon is that the shore leaves especially have a very thick cuticle. Again, cuticle being that waxy layer that helps prevent water loss through the leaves. So we have our three gymnosperm species. Okay, we talked about the loblolly pine, the spruce pine, and the cypress. And remember, for those, you don't really have to worry too much about leaf arrangement and leaf type and so on. Okay, then we have Blackberry. All right, we did the swamp red maple, the sweetgum, the Muscadine, Ash's arrowwood, Trumpet creeper, Chinese privet, Yaupon, water oak, and we did one more. What was it? It was the black cherry. Okay, the black cherry. All right. So let's continue on and find a few more of our plants. Stop for a moment and try to see if you can figure out what kind of plant this is. Feel free to pause the video at any time. It's a black cherry. Good. Let's move on. Can you identify this plant? That's right. It's a muscadine. Good. Can you identify this species? Correct. It's a Chinese privet. Okay, so this is a nice tree species. So we're all probably familiar with magnolia, all right? Magnolias produce those big, beautiful white flowers, and they have those very large, distinct leaves, and very often with kind of a fuzzy underside. Well, this is a closely related species. This is what's called a Sweetbay magnolia. Sweetbay magnolia can be distinguished from, you know, the regular ones, the other magnolias, southern magnolias, by their relatively narrow leaves, all right? So they have these relatively narrow leaves, again with pinnate leaf venation. And they have this alternate arrangement, okay, one leaf per node with these large, simple leaves. Okay, Sweetbay magnolia. Called Sweetbay magnolia because the leaves, for one, they're very fragrant, and they look rather like bay leaves. Okay. Can you identify this plant species? Correct. It's Ash's arrowwood. Okay, this is another very important plant species because it is a destructive invasive species. Okay, this is what's called a Chinese tallow. All right, Chinese tallow. Triadica cibifera is a scientific name. It's one of the few plants that I actually know the scientific names for. So if you look, they have these really distinct kind of spade-shaped leaves. Reminds me of like, you know, like a spade, like on a deck of cards, or an actual shovel, which is what a spade is. All right. Let's next try to determine the leaf type. Well, here we have what we think might be a leaf, and look at that really clear and distinct axillary bud right there. Okay. And next, it's only got one per node, so we know that it has an alternate leaf arrangement. Okay, alternate leaf arrangement. All right. So these guys, they're called Chinese tallow because apparently you can use the berries and different parts of the plant to make like soaps, tallowy oils and things like that. Okay, and they're also widely planted as ornamental trees because in the springtime, not quite now, but they were earlier, they bloom with all these beautiful little white flowers. Okay, but they're extremely hardy and they tend to outcompete a lot of native species, so they're problematic for that reason. Okay, so that should put us now up to 15 species. Can you tell me what type of plant this is? That's right. It's a, what is it? It's a trumpet creeper is what it is. Okay? Again, remember, it's got that distinct pinnately compound leaf with the opposite leaf arrangement. Those 2 leaves per node. What about this one? Very good. It's a blackberry. All right? Blackberries, and there's a little damselfly, which is nice. So blackberries, unlike this other one, the one we just talked about, which is the trumpet creeper, they have palmately compound leaves. Let's actually take a quick look at that, just to be sure that we're on the same page. Okay? So, with a pinnately compound leaf, you have these multiple clusters of leaflets branching off from the rachis at distinct points. With a palmately compound leaf, all of the leaflets are branching off from a single point. Okay, but they're both just one giant leaf with multiple different leaflets. Oh, let's move on. Can you identify this plant? You should, because we just did it. This is a Chinese tallow. That's right. Good. Ah, yes. Here we come to what is another one of my favorite plants, okay? So this is what's called a chestnut oak, or a swamp chestnut oak, or a cow oak, okay? I think the reason they call them cow oaks, and I don't actually know, this makes sense to me, is because the leaves look like giant cow ears, or regular-sized cow ears, okay? Anyways, they've got this big kind of dumb-looking leaves, okay, that are wider at the end of the margin than they are at the base, okay, with this kind of wavy tooth-like appearance along the edges, all right? And it's got, let's look for the leaf type, just like all oaks typically, there's an axillary bud, so it's got a simple leaf, okay, with an alternate leaf arrangement, 1 leaf per node, all right, swamp chestnut oak. Okay, for our final plant, we're going to do the American beech. Now, I've said this before, but this time I really mean it. This is my favorite plant, okay? So again, American beech is very similar to the black cherry, just superficially looking at it, okay? It's got that kind of toothy edge, it's green, and it also has this alternate simple leaf arrangement, okay? But again, with the American beech, the leaves are fuzzy, okay, and if you look at the underside, you don't see that fine kind of scaly pattern, all right, instead you see these very distinct leaf or veins, okay, yeah, and it's also fuzzy on the bottom, okay, so mostly by touch you could tell these guys, and yeah, so that's American beech, okay. That will conclude our lab. If you have any questions about any of these plants, please feel free to send me an email. And you could expect to have a quiz on this material next week, and you can absolutely count on seeing pictures of these plants on your final exam.